Welcome to Victim's View, a show produced by the Solicitor General's Office. I'm Carmen Smith, the Solicitor General. The Solicitor General's Office prosecutes misdemeanor cases in state court. Unfortunately, we handle a lot of cases in which the driver is charged with drinking under the influence of alcohol and/or drugs. The consequences to the crash victims can be devastating. Today we're talking with Cynthia Hagain, Lead Victim Services Specialist for MAD. Thank you for joining us today, Cynthia.
Thank you for having me.
Now, a lot of people have heard about MAD, but I don't think they have the real picture. Could you give us some background on MAD, how it came about, what your vision is, your goals?
Yes, ma'am. MAD was started in 1980. It was started because a mother's daughter was walking home and she was killed by a habitual drunk driver. The organization started, it grew. It is a nonprofit, and it still is today, and it will be our 33rd year of existence. And while MAD stands for Mothers Against Drunk Driving, anybody can be a mother, a brother, a father, a sister, a cousin. It doesn't just happen to mothers, and most of our volunteers are not moms anyway, because there's more or less moms than no moms.
Well, what about the location of it? Is this a statewide organization, or is it just in Atlanta?
Well, this is a nationwide organization, and I represent the Georgia State Office. And the mission of MAD is to eliminate drunk and impaired driving, support the victims of this violent crime, which is my job at MAD, and to prevent underage drinking.
And in Georgia, where are you located?
We're located just outside 285, and we serve the entire state. We represent Metro Atlanta, Fulton County, the entire state of Georgia.
So if someone wanted to contact MAD or get more information, do you have a website?
Yes, ma'am. Our website is www.madd.org. If you want specifically to go to the Georgia-specific stuff, you can either hit the local offices link, or you can just type in MAD Georgia on whatever browser search that you're using, and it'll pop up to our site.
And you stated that this is a national organization, but you're representing the state of Georgia's.
Yes, ma'am. We have a state office. We're the affiliate office for the state of Georgia, and we work all over the state of Georgia. But we are located in Metro Atlanta.
Do you also have any satellite offices?
Currently, we do not. MAD is 99.9% volunteer. I don't think a lot of people realize that. We have a very, very tiny, tiny staff. I think we each have 1.9 million Georgians per person. So we are very dependent on our volunteers, interns, community service workers. So if anyone ever decides they want to get involved, we always need volunteers for our organization.
So I assume as a nonprofit, you have an executive director and other people, I guess, on your board. How is that made up?
We have an executive director, and we have also a state advisory board, and we have other positions in our office. One is in charge of programs, which that includes dealing with law enforcement, volunteers, court monitoring. We have a youth specialist who deals with, working with parents, our Power of Parents programs, our youth programs. I'm the victim service person, so I'm dealing with victims, crash survivors, but also child endangerment issues which do arise.
And do you also, I guess, have phone calls? Do people call into the office and on occasion, or do you go out and do some outreach as far as going to schools and other organizations?
Yes, ma'am. It kind of depends on what is being called for. Like our youth person will do more of schools, but sometimes schools and colleges and churches will want a victim or crash survivor to come and share their story. And so they would call me. But anyone can call the MAD Georgia office. It's 770-615-3737. Also, we can be looked up on the internet, and I think even 411 will pull up MAD.
Oh my goodness. So as far as the outreach, there's a lot of, I'm sure, activities going on as far as reaching out to the community. Is that correct?
That is correct. There's usually, when there's local health fairs or community events, people will call us up, ask us to bring a MAD table. Schools and PTA programs are calling us up and asking us to bring the Power of Parents program. And that program is to educate parents on how to talk about alcohol issues with their teenagers. And that is a fairly new program, and that's what we've mostly been focusing on. Also, if someone is a victim or crash survivor, we'll go out to district attorney's office, prosecution offices all across the state of Georgia. There's Victims' Rights Day, and we're involved with that. But one of the biggest community events that we have is actually our walk. we have an annual walk, and that's usually held in Metro Atlanta, and that's where not just victim families and crash survivors, but anyone in the community who is concerned about impaired driving or underage drinking in their neighborhoods come out, start a walk team, get involved, and it's a great gathering, really.
And I assume you also interact with other agencies, I guess with the state, the Office of Highway Safety, that sort of thing?
Yes, ma'am. We interact with so many agencies. There's so many things that connect with MAD. On the law enforcement side, that can be, regular police departments, city, municipalities, Georgia State troopers, but there's also like EMS workers, hospitals, because of the victims that, go through their services, as well as the coroner's offices. On the victim services side, we interact with prosecution offices, other agencies that serve victims that we partner with. There's some places that they offer services and they'll use our victims, like Kate's Club, specifically works with children who are bereaved, and they now do crime victims. There's CVAC, when they do support groups for homicide, DUI victims, so we refer people to them. Pretty much everyone that we can possibly team up with, we do, because we have a very large state. And there's a lot of victims out there. And this is a very specific type of crime because we're not just dealing with victim families, there's also crash survivors. And so if you survive a crash, depending on the extent of your injuries, you may go to Shepherd Center. You may need to contact the Brain Injury Trust Fund. There's other organizations out there that we try to connect everyone with. And we're kind of like a gigantic referral service as well.
Well, you stated how big the state of Georgia is, but we also have a ton of people who love to drive and unfortunately drink. One of the concerns that we have are the minors in possession of alcohol charges that we usually have with going to a big party, perhaps. The kids get there and they start to drink, and then somebody gets the bright idea to get behind the wheel of a car. It's a very important program that you have with the parents, and I want you to talk a little bit more about that particular program, because I don't think that most parents know about it. I think some people are not aware that their children are driving until they get arrested. But could you tell us a little bit more about that parenting program?
Right. When they recently did polls, they were finding out that most parents don't really realize how much their children are drinking underage. And so the Power of Parents is an evidence-based education program. It's about 30 minutes long, and people can invite MAD to come out and teach the parents and also train parents to train other parents. But the root of it is children emulate what they see their parents do. They really do. And for years, most of the prevention programs have been aimed at the teenagers, which they're absolutely great. But we're trying to go after the parents because the parents have the biggest influence on their kids. I think a lot of parents like to think that maybe their kids aren't doing something, but they are. And this is very important because about a third of our victims on our wall are kids who are killed getting into cars with other teenage drivers. And these were all underage drinking crashes. They're all preventable. And if they're not necessarily killed, they're injured. And the extent of their injuries could be paralyzation. They could have brain injury, things that teenagers aren't going to think of just because they're teenagers. And I know I didn't at that age. So it's really going back to the parent. Kids listen to their parents. And so parents are the biggest influencer.
And somehow I think sometimes the parents aren't, informed about what is a crime and not a crime in Georgia.
That is correct.
And when it comes to misdemeanor crimes, I find that so often they don't understand that a minor possession of alcohol is a crime and they can be prosecuted for it. Now, if you're under 17, you might go through the juvenile system, but when you're over 17, it would come to my office. And that's unfortunate to start your life out with something on your record like that.
Exactly. And I think one of the other groups that we partner with is working with law enforcement to go to convenience stores and restaurants to see if kids are being sold underage. That is a huge problem because a lot of businesses will sell to those under the age of 21. And so, the number one place kids get alcohol, though, is still from their parents' house. But the second place is convenience stores, places like that they'll shop and, I guess you also prosecute those as well, the people
Yes,
who...
we do. Yes,
the
we
people
do.
who sell to underage. And if, God forbid, one of those kids that they sold underage to kills someone or kills themselves, I mean, that's just absolutely devastating, not just to the family and their friends, but the whole community.
And it's unacceptable.
Exactly. It is completely tragic. It is completely violent. It's a horrible way to lose someone, and it's preventable. That's the key.
That is
something
the key.
that is so preventable.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, but stay tuned because when we come back, we're going to learn more about MAD. Welcome back to Victim's View. I'm talking to Cynthia Hagain, Lead Victim Services Specialist for MAD. In your role as lead specialist, what do you do, Cynthia?
Well, that's just a fancy term for what I actually do. The better word for it is I'm the victim advocate. I'm the only paid victim advocate in the state. All the other advocates that MAD has, they're all volunteers. And so that's very important to us, and they're a very, very precious group of people because they take time out of their own lives to work with other families. But what I do is I work with families who have lost a loved one. Sometimes it's immediately right after the crash, even before a funeral, and sometimes it could be 5, 10, 15 years down the road. There really is no timeline as to when somebody wants to, I guess, work on their grief, and MAD is an excellent place to do that. But for the immediate, for the immediate need, when someone calls us, if they, most people don't know what to do when their loved one is killed. It's so devastating, and you're in shock. What do I do? Who do I call? That's when if they call me then I can help direct them to, this is who the prosecutor is going to be. Let's work on getting a crash report. Let me introduce you to the victim advocate in the court. That's the person who will work with you when you go to felony court. If it's a case, though, where somebody has been injured in a crash and perhaps they're in the hospital, families getting hold of us as quickly as possible so we can help them file for victims' compensation. And also getting in touch with the right prosecution as well, because some people are injured, but they don't fit the definition of serious injury under Georgia law. And so the person who hit them may go ahead and plead out on their DUI, and the prosecution will never know the extent of the injuries of that victim. And that is probably the majority of the injury cases that I work are people who are injured severely, but not clear-cut enough that it's easily recognizable after the initial crash. And so we try to get them hooked up to the right people, so make sure their case is going to the right place.
Well, that road goes both ways. When people are victims of our drunk driving cases contact us, we can refer them also back to you. But we also serve as a point of a resource. You're a resource. You give them information. Nobody plans to be in a car accident. Nobody plans to have a drunk driver injure anybody in their family, but someplace to call. And it's always important to know that they can call your office. And that's a really important thing for victims, because nobody asks to be a victim.
Exactly. And even in the cases where the injuries, physical injuries, are not severe, the emotional toll it takes surviving a crash, and the fact that I've got to go to court, am I going to be a witness? Do I need to write a victim impact statement? We try to make sure that the people know that you have certain rights, even in misdemeanor court. And a lot of people don't understand that. They just think that the person will go get their DUI and I'll just go get my insurance money and that's it. But then later on, after the shock is worn off, even just surviving a crash, you need an outlet. And that's the number one thing MAD does, is we provide an outlet for people who've survived crashes, as well as most people think of MAD as only if you've been killed in a crash. But for people who've been injured, and more people are injured than are killed, and so that's very important.
And although we have victim advocates in my office, I think one of the misconceptions is that we're sort of fighting over victims, and we certainly are not. There's enough victims out there who need help that everyone should try to help them as much as they can on both sides of the fence. I think most of our problem that you don't see is that when it comes to the civil cases, they tend to try to draw us into that, and we need to focus back on our victims and our case. And that's so hard to do when you're bombarded by the legal system on the civil side that has another goal.
Exactly.
Money damages, which is not an issue in criminal court.
Exactly, and I think that's we do a lot of help on civil cases. We have a civil attorney referral sheet, and all of our attorneys are people who only do personal injury. They don't do any defense because we think it's conflict of interest for someone to do defense and victims. Like, it's kind of like pick a side, please.
Right.
Even though there are some excellent lawyers who do both sides. But you're right. Some people still think that MAD is confrontational, and we're not. We're a backup, if anything. It's people will call up and go, well, they said this and they said this, and I'm going, yes, they're right. That's exactly right. I'm almost a point of clarification just to make them realize that the prosecution side is working for you. They're not against you, they're for you. But there are a lot of little nuances in the law that make sometimes prosecuting a case extremely difficult. And Matt understands that. And so we're always available as a backup to re-explain it, because when you've suffered a loss or if you've been through a crash, you've got to hear the information more than 3 times, sometimes 100 times. It has nothing to do with intelligence. It has purely to do with this information is brand new, you're still in shock, and it's a lot to have to deal with.
Well, you've mentioned that most of your folks are volunteers. I would imagine that you also provide training for those volunteers.
Yes, ma'am. We try to have a training at least once a year. We do a lot of individual training, and we'll go all over the state, like South Georgia or North Georgia, just wherever the demand meets, wherever there's demand. We also, when we have volunteers that want to work on a particular event, like the walk or vigil or even legislative day, we'll have a training beforehand. We do a lot of one-on-one because sometimes it's easier to explain stuff that way, but we'll do a training that way as well.
Isn't that challenging for you as the statewide lead service?
It is. It is extremely challenging because there are so many people, and it is hard to be everywhere, which is why I hate that I can't be cloned. But we do what we can as much as we can because the cause is important and it's worthwhile. That's why we always need people to get involved, because it just takes one other person getting involved to help spread the word where they live and in their community. Even within Fulton County, there's so many little areas. There's north, there's south, there's downtown, there's midtown. I mean, there's all over the place.
Tell me about it.
You can't have enough people. You can't have enough help.
Well, just for a point of clarity,
yes, ma'am.
You are not lawyers, so you're not representing them in trying to get any money damages or anything like that.
That is
because
correct.
You mentioned compensation, and let's just clear up.
Right.
What
That compensation I was referring to is the criminal Justice Coordinating Council. Operates the organization that handles Victims of Crime Act.
You tried the whole thing. We just say CJCC.
CJCC, right. Basically, there's a National Victims of Crime Act, and it has certain levels of compensation in each state. And so that is a payer of last resort. Most people's insurance companies pay first, and then if they don't have insurance, that's when it comes in handy. But we're not lawyers. We do not offer legal advice. That's why we refer people to attorneys. We just kind of help re-explain some legal terms, and if we can't understand it, then we call the lawyer and go, can you re-explain it to them one more time?
That is so helpful to get that explanation so they'll know the difference.
Exactly.
But again, I guess I'm really fascinated that you have such a small staff and you're serving the whole state of Georgia. What about fielding phone calls? Can people expect to get a phone call return right away, or?
In theory, yes, ma'am. We would like to return everyone's call right away. The majority of our phone calls are we offer a MAD class, and that is a class where victims who have lost a loved one or survived a crashes share their stories. And the people typically who are court-ordered to attend that are people who've had DUIs, perhaps underage drinking, and perhaps other traffic violations. Because I don't think people realize that any decision you make behind a wheel of a car can have a permanent impact on another human being. And so we get a lot of phone calls from people looking for the MAD class. And that's probably the majority of our phone calls. But we're always available. Our website's always available. We try to put everything Georgia-specific on the MAD Georgia part of the MAD website so that the information is always available.
If folks want to volunteer, for example, because I know a lot of lawyers who've retired and they're looking for maybe other opportunities to utilize their services, Do they contact you, and is there a screening process or an application of some
Yes, ma'am.
sort?
We have applications for volunteers, for interns, as well as community service. Some people don't realize that we do community service, and we typically use people who've had a DUI or underage drinking just so that it fits more into the scope of the ticket or crime that they committed. But we have applications, we have people fill them out, we interview them, we talk to them, and it's a pretty quick process. So we have background checks on anyone who works with children, obviously, or with our victims. We have a much more strict screening process for anybody who works with youth or our victims.
Well, I would hope that you serving most of the state, that you weren't challenged like we are in so many instances with being underserved in South Georgia. I would imagine we wouldn't have that problem so much in the metropolitan area.
Yes, that is true. That is one thing I'm very confident that most of the prosecution offices in Metro Atlanta do such an excellent job and do have more resources than outside Metro Atlanta. So most of our volunteer chapter areas are outside Metro Atlanta because there is such a need in those areas.
And unfortunately, that need keeps growing.
That is true. That is true. But there are still more crashes in Metro Atlanta because more people pass through Atlanta, so there's always a huge need in Atlanta.
There's always something going on in Atlanta.
Yes, ma'am, there is, which is why I love living here.
I want to thank Cynthia Hagain for being here today. I'll be back with some final thoughts about MAD right after this. Unfortunately, there are a lot of drivers who make the mistake of driving under the influence of alcoholic beverages or drugs. That decision could result in fatalities or serious injuries to the victims. MAD offers free direct services to those victims and promotes safety on our roadways and waterways. I want to thank Cynthia Hagain for joining us today. And thank you for watching Victims View. We'll see you next time.